Okay, the video for the month that those who donate $10 or more have voted on is Technology and Socialism. Now specifically it refers to as building a revolution with technology, how to defend it with technology, and all that. Now my personal opinion on a lot of this is that technology and socialism, as for the mainstream discussion of it, is massively overblown. I far more prefer the much more intellectual and economic work of Professor Paul Cockshott regarding the application of technology inside of socialism, and some of that related to the cybernetic socialism that Allende's Chile. Now, Paul Cockshott wrote a whole book about this, like how to program an economy, how to set up workplaces based on technology, and this whole thing that could be done with regards to advanced technology and socialism. So, I can't give you anything that would even come close to what's in that book. Now, see, that book is like basically the Bible for that kind of thing. However, I would like to say that first worldists tend to massively overestimate the value of technology with regards to revolution. Now, some of there's different contrasting views, but one of them that shows up is we'll just go to socialism anyway once, production becomes automated enough. Now, the theory is that you won't need workers anymore, so therefore the bourgeoisie won't hire workers. Well, there's two main problems with this. One, if that were to be the case, there would definitely be a transitory period. It isn't they're just going to abolish all labor all at once, if they would even do that. More likely, they would just continue to use technology so long as it's cheaper than using human labor. Once human labor is more expensive than using automation, then they'll switch to that. And it's not like the bourgeoisie are just going to realize one day, oh, okay, that's it, let's just abolish labor, a basic income, and then everything will be okay. There's going to be a great deal of resistance to that. It's not something that's just going to happen by itself. I mean, that really is the first worldist kind of hope, that it just happens by itself, so we don't have to really do anything. It'll just happen. I think another problem with it is the perception of there being some kind of Venus Project kind of world outlook. Now, I don't believe that there's anything inherently wrong with the Venus Project. I think it's a little too liberal utopian, but I wouldn't be opposed to it actually existing. The problem is how we're going to get there, and that's the biggest thing that the Venus Project has always overlooked, is how do you actually get from capitalism to the Venus Project? Well, they say things, really vague liberal things like a revolution of the mind, we're going to reach people, or even in their own video, the third Zeitgeist movie, where everybody just marches up to the banks and throws their money away, throws their money at them, and the banker picks up a phone and says, oh, we call it quits and capitalism doesn't exist anymore. I mean, if that isn't the fucking definition of utopian, I don't know what is. The idea that everybody's just going to suddenly stop buying food and paying their rent, just all of a sudden. And that's a very first worldist concept of revolution itself. One day the masses are just going to spontaneously rise up and take down the system. Or one day they're just going to throw all their money away. Just somehow the vast majority of people are just going to suddenly agree to get rid of the prevailing system and then massively cooperate all at once to it. Now, it takes an insane amount of organization to build a revolution. Ask anybody who's actually done it. Ask Lenin, ask Mao, yes, of course, they're dead, etc. But it was not something that just organically happened. And this really goes into something that I've thought before about Stalin, and something that he said that was wrong. He said the boat would row itself to shore with or without a helmsman. Sorry, that's not true. Revolution is not inevitable. It's not something that's just going to happen by itself. It has to be organized. It has to be something that is worked on, something that is set up and led by some force or another. It's not this utopian, kind of anarchist, zeitgeist kind of liberalism where everybody just suddenly agrees. Another one that I really don't particularly care for is the fully automated gay space luxury communism. The problem I have with it is the automated space luxury communism, or more specifically the automated communism. I think it speaks very much to the inherent character of revolution in the first world and revolution of the third world, this expression. In the third world, it's very much we organize to overthrow the bourgeoisie. We will build a better world. We will use the power of human potential to build our country in a way that's sustainable for ourselves, for our future, and respect our rights as human beings. Whereas the prevailing kind of idea in first worldism is that, oh, we're going to build like machines so that we don't have to work. Okay, I find that very strange, that the idea is that they're going to abolish having to work. Like, that's an important thing for them. Revolution is a tremendously arduous task. It requires a great deal of sacrifice and effort. Whereas you got the people in the third world going, okay, now we're going to have this whole huge, we're fighting to rebuild. Whereas in the first world, we're organizing to not work. And that's the real goal there. I mean, once revolution happens, first world people, first world Marxists in general, are expecting things to be easier. They're expecting things to be softer on them. Whereas comrades in the third world are very realistic about what's happening. They know it's going to get harder. It's going to get more dangerous. And that there's a whole arduous labor process to build the country up to the point. Because that's easy to do when you live in the first world and it's already built up. Then it becomes the next step of just not having to work. So you get that while it is not this not wanting to work is not inherent to Marxism, there's a big element of it in first worldism, and we see that with the slogans that they use. Fully automated gay space luxury communism. It's like we completely put together the most liberal slogan that we possibly could. Not that there's anything wrong with it. The problem is the way it's being applied. First of all, space shouldn't even be a consideration right now. The fight is right here on Earth against our own class. So even thinking about this whole developing technology to a point where we don't have to work thing is like, shouldn't even be thought about right now. The actual real struggle, the actual fight to build a revolution, the thing that doesn't actually happen in the advanced countries, is the thing that needs to happen, and that's what needs to be focused on. It's a lot of this thinking about things way into the future when you haven't even laid the groundwork to even get to any of these kinds of things. And that's a genuine problem with a lot of first worldism in general. It's a lot of lofty philosophizing about, the way things could be, or what should we do, or what kind of new ideas can we come up with that past Marxist scholars couldn't have thought of. And they really hyper-focus on that, but give nothing of a thought about what it is to actually build revolution. See, well, there's a very good reason for that. And that reason is that first world people are not willing to struggle. I mean, anybody can really see that. When you look at third world people who actually do revolution, who actually do fight, and then you have people here who don't fight. And going to a protest, something that even I've done, isn't actually fighting because you're not actually fighting. Now there is the exception for, say, the Black Bloc, and that's the one thing I'll give anarchists credit for. They actually are fighting where the vast majority of Marxists are not. Fighting fascism is great. Okay, totally down with that. Great. But that's not revolution in itself. So I'm not trying to cut anarchists down. I'm giving them credit where credit is due. But that should not be confused for an actual physical fight against the bourgeois state. I mean, we know first world people aren't going to do it. If you legitimately walk up to a homeless guy, or even, as many first worldists like to say, well, it's the more advanced sections of the working class. like the $60,000 a year union construction worker and hand them a rifle and say, okay, time to go kill the bourgeois state, they're not going to do it. I mean, legitimately, the guy's not going to give up his pension, his 2 cars, his house, to engage in guerrilla combat. I mean, I don't care how much you feel class war is a thing in the first world, they're not going to do it. And no kind of idea that it needs to happen, which it does, will make it happen. Despite the fact that revolution very much does need to happen in the first world, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen just because it needs to happen. That's the huge problem the first worldism makes. That because it's needed, it will therefore happen. So if I say there's no revolutionary potential in the first world, or no significant revolutionary potential, nothing enough that would be something that could even be built, they turn around and say, well, you're saying revolution doesn't need to happen? Yeah, I'm sure there are people suffering. I'm sure there is a need for it. But they're not going to do it. That's the point. Because they have been bought off with the spoils of imperialism. That's the point where they're not going to struggle. Just look at the difference between what happened with the Iraq-Afghanistan wars. 3 million people were killed, but there was way more outrage from first world people, and that includes non-Marxists. Which, I mean, if that's the point, you're trying to reach the masses, it's important what the masses of first world people are saying too. There's far more outrage at the loss of net neutrality than there is over the deaths of 3 million people. Now, this is not to minimize the seriousness of net neutrality. Of course, this is an important issue. But look at what's being focused on. What's being focused on is the net neutrality, and not the millions of people that are dying. It's just a running theme that goes throughout first worldism, and usually a big problem with, sorry, my eyes itching me. A big problem that happens is there's a lot of high philosophizing kind of bullshit instead of, actual working. Like you get certain people whose names I won't mention because they're going to start screaming about how they had a bad childhood, so therefore global class doesn't exist. Continually pound on about philosophy in the, here's what this fucking asshole that has nothing to do with socialism said at X time, and what kind of relevance can I force it to fit today that bears any relevance? It doesn't. That seems to be the one key thing that these little bourgeois intellectuals, like the Kasama Project type, I mean, I would give specific names of people who are guilty of this, but then they start screaming harassment like a bunch of little bitches. Again, get off that topic now. That's the problem. Nobody wants to think about the actual organization for revolution. I mean, you've got people that are running around St. Louis, a particular, like a Red Guard organization of black people, running around claiming that they're doing revolution in St. Louis. But nobody listens to them. Nobody cares about them. They're completely LARPing a revolution that doesn't exist. If you actually go to the black masses of first world people, they're not going to give a shit about Marx. They don't seem to understand. Like, a lot of these groups that try to organize don't get it. This is not the 60s. This is not the Black Panthers. There's a huge section of the bourgeoisie that are black. There's a huge reactionary element within the black community, just as there is within the white community. That's not to say black people aren't oppressed. I'm not saying that. That's not to say there aren't racist police killers, because of course there are. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying there's also this element as well. And they continue to try to emulate the Black Panthers, but they don't accomplish anything. And the problem is they're just trying to copy paste what happened then onto now. And that's the general problem that I have with technology that's completely gone off onto a tangent about something else. That there is such a focus on what things could be like that people don't think about what it means to actually get there. And that's actually the most important thing of all. And that's the point, and that's the aspect that everybody just seems to be forgetting, especially when it comes to issues of technology and socialism. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.